What if everything you thought and believed about successful buying, selling, and financing your home was wrong? Welcome to Homewise with Miget. This is where you can count on straightforward, objective advice on the right way to make the most out of every dollar you put into your home. Whether it's buying, selling, or financing, even maintaining and growing its value along the way. Coming to you from the News Talk STL studios at Union Station in St. Louis.
Good morning and welcome to Homewise Radio. My name is Stal Ponticus. Thank you for listening. And I'm joined here in the studio by Michael Miget, the host and creator of Homewise Radio. Michael, how are you, buddy?
I'm good, Stel. How are you?
Doing fine, thank you. We've got a lot of stuff to cover on this week's edition of the show, so I'm going to let you jump right in.
Yeah, this one's going to be a little different. We're going to shift gears. Kind of been a little heavy in certain things, like rates and strategies, and it's been really thick and deep. And today I kind of wanted to shift gears a little bit and tell a little story.
All right.
Now, it still ties into everything, but basically what we're going to do is I'm going to tie together Steve Jobs, Scientific American Magazine, Warren Buffett, and the democratization of home ownership.
Well, you're hitting on all cylinders here, buddy. Okay.
It's going to be a wild ride, so buckle up. Let's get going here. All right, so a few years back, I was watching a movie. I like the biographical, dramatic reenactments of people's lives, and one of my favorites is Steve Jobs. Okay, and there's several movies about him like this. The one I'm thinking of, though, it's not the good one. Okay, it's not the one with Ashton Kutcher. Mm-hmm. That's the one I like the best. But I think this is the one where it's Michael Fassbender plays Jobs, and basically the whole movie is set happens backstage at one of the Apple events near the end of Jobs' career at Apple.
By the way, for folks who are not familiar with him, just let folks know that he was the founder of Apple.
He was the founder of Apple.
Okay. Just want to make sure everybody knows.
No, sure. Yes, I tend to gloss over little details like
that. No, that's okay.
That, so.
But we may have some younger listeners who are thinking,
you're right.
Not familiar with the guy.
Yeah, so just if you are younger, this is the guy that invented the iPhone, right? So everybody knows what an iPhone is. But before there was an iPhone, there were Apple. I mean, there's Apple computers now, but there were, it was sort of like the computer at one time. The scenes are it's the event. It takes place backstage at an Apple event, and the whole movie are flashbacks. And this event interdispersed together, and it tells a story. But towards the end of the movie, in one of those flashbacks, it's a scene where Jobs is sitting in a restaurant, and he's talking to a guy named John Scully. And this was, at the time, John Scully was the head of Pepsi, CEO. He was running Pepsi, the soda, soft drink company. And Steve is pitching him on leaving Pepsi and coming to run Apple for him. And part of that pitch, Steve goes into, and he's telling this story about how he believes and thinks of the computer as a bicycle for the mind. When I heard that, I wasn't really tuned into the movie. I was kind of just sort of half watching it because it's not my favorite version of the story. But as far as I know, it's the only version of the story that includes this idea in it. And
that particular phrase.
Yes, exactly. And it was the first time that I had heard it. Mm-hmm. And so I just immediately, and there's a little bit of a story that goes with it. I really latched onto that because I really liked the idea. Turns out this was based on a Scientific American article. Okay, so Scientific American is a magazine, still around. But this was back from March of 1973. There was an article titled Bicycle Technology. And basically what they did was there was a study done where they measured the efficiency, called it efficiency of locomotion. Okay, so locomotion is, it's the efficiency of how animals and vehicles and things are able to move around. Okay. So they tested things like mice. All right, mice did very bad. right? They're near the bottom of the list, very inefficient. Caloric expenditure related to their body weight. Okay, so that was the measure of what they were testing.
Next time I look at a mouse, I'm going to think of this.
Yeah, well, apparently they get really worn out running around that wheel in the cage.
And by the way, just as a side note, my last name means little mouse in Greek.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, Bundikaki. Continue.
Little mouse for such a tall guy, you know.
I know.
So mice didn't do very good. All right. On the other end of the spectrum, near the top of the list, meaning most efficient, salmon and the condor, the bird. Okay. So they did very good. Humans were also tested right around the middle, right around the middle of the list. So not bad, not good, and Steve referred to this as the crowning creation, the crown jewel of creation. We're supposed to be the smartest, best in our environment. But in this test, we didn't do so good. So somebody at Scientific American came up with the idea that, hey, let's test a human on a bicycle. Okay. So he did that, measured it, boom, shot way to the top of the list, by far, blew everything else away, the most efficient combination there. And Steve really latched onto this. He put two and two together and said, you know what? Computers do the same thing for the human mind that a bicycle does for human locomotion. It makes up for the shortcomings that are built in, built into us. So he came up with the saying, or he would think of a computer as a bicycle for the mind. So things like, think like repetitive tasks, data storage and recall, heavy, deep, like mathematical calculations, things like that. Things you think of, like today are routinely done by computers. But think to a time prior to when there was a computer on everybody's desk, because Apple was instrumental in putting a computer on everybody's desk. So at the time this was taking place, that computer revolution hadn't happened yet. And so he's talking to Scully and he's selling him on this idea. And he says, look, what I want to do is I want to make, this idea that people need computers as a reason for them to have them. It's got to be the right computer, right? So it's not like a junky computer. It's not a computer that's difficult to use. It's not an unuser-friendly computer. Same way like a bicycle that wasn't rideable wouldn't help a human. The right computer in everybody's hands, okay? To me, that was code for a revolution. And that's basically what Scully said was if you could do that, be a tectonic shift in the status quo, it would completely reset everything, change the way business is done, redirect a lot of things. Because
computers back then were huge.
Yeah,
you had the storage data.
Yeah, they were big, they were bulky, they were
cumbersome,
expensive, very cumbersome. They weren't mainstream.
Yeah.
Okay, so the idea that you would have a computer on your desk, computers were things that were like off in another room. They had a whole team of people to run them.
Mm-hmm.
They had a small power plant hooked up to them to run because they were extremely used a lot of power.
And Steve wants to streamline it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, he wanted to, I call it the democratization of business or the PC or the ownership of personal computers.
Mm-hmm.
Took what was big, mainframe network, and he broke it out into a smaller fractional piece that someone could basically bring home with them and offload those tasks that they're not very good. So he references, one of the big inflection points for PCs was spreadsheets. Okay. A calculator, right? You could do calculations on it. So you didn't have to do it with the mind. Human mind's not very good at that. But a computer, a spreadsheet, you can program it so you put one figure in and it does a whole stream of calculations. It's basically how a computer runs. there was another inflection point you mentioned about desktop publishing, right? So today we kind of take for granted that there's this thing called word processor, and it's on a computer that's on my desk, or maybe it's in my pocket now. And you can type something like I typed out the outline for this show and I printed it out on a printer this morning. That used to be a whole industry in and of itself, to the point that like you'd have to take this somewhere and get it printed. This idea that an individual could do this on call in real time immediately when they need it. Like I typed this out, I printed it out, and I ran out the door. That wouldn't have happened at this time. So there were a lot of kind of Herculean shifts that took place because of this. It's really spectacularly interesting and powerful and all of that. And I just bring that up because we take it for granted today. And there's a theme in that. There's something else that we take for granted today as well. And it's what we're gonna talk about next here. But we're gonna go to break, and when we come back, I'm gonna tie this into Warren Buffett.
Okay, let's take a quick break here. You're listening to Homewise Radio. That's Michael Miget. I'm Stal Ponticus, and we will rejoin you in just a couple of minutes here on Homewise Radio. Thanks for joining us for Homewise Radio. I'm Stal Ponticus, along with the host and creator of Homewise Radio, Michael Miget, here in the studio. And Michael, let's get back into our discussion.
Thanks, Stal. So we've been talking about Steve Jobs and one of his not well-known but famous quotes, "Computer is a bicycle for the mind," and where that came from, and the Scientific American article, and basically humans take tools to augment their ability to exist, work in their environment, things like that. That's truly what sets us apart from other species of things in the world. Not our ability to move from place to place on our own 2 feet. And he viewed the computer as a tool. All right. So in this segment, you guys know one of my favorite investors and people to talk about is Warren Buffett. All right. And intensely interesting, just a regular guy. Okay. And he has a not well known but famous quote, particularly famous to me, which is he refers to the miracle of the 30-year fixed rate mortgage. So if you ask Warren Buffett, what's the best investment there is? What's the best investment somebody can make? He says 30-year fixed rate mortgage. Buy a home, use a 30-year fixed rate mortgage. All right. Now, personally, he said his third best, and that was his third best investment, was investment in his house, and he still has that same house all these years later. He owned it for a long time. Interestingly enough, 1 and 2 were both wedding rings. So there's a little
interesting
story that goes along with that, but think about it, okay, what does that 30-year mortgage do? It allows you to buy a house when you don't have all the money. You can lock in the cost of that, and you can spread it out over time at a relatively low rate. You can break it down into chunks. And if rates go up, you're protected by the fixed rate, and the payment stays the same over time. Right? So you don't get into it and have it go up on you later because the deal changed and now you can't afford it. You're protected by that. And if and when rates go down, you can always reduce your costs. You can refinance. And that's essentially a one-way renegotiation. If you think about that, okay, if rates go up, it means the value of my investment as the mortgage holder, like the person that owns or invested in the mortgage, goes down. My value went down because there's an inverse relationship there. But if rates go down, which means the value of my investment went up, you refinance it and take out a better loan and basically pay me off. I mean, it sounds like a really bad deal. And from an investor's standpoint. So there's a lot more moving parts than that behind the scenes, but it's just, I mean, if you think about it, the terms under which you take out that mortgage are very favorable to the borrower. Okay. It turns out that the United States is one of the only countries that even has a 30-year fixed rate available. And we're the only country where it's the dominant form of finance. Okay. So a lot of other countries have shorter term mortgages. They have mortgages that are tied to adjustable rates. They might be fixed for shorter periods of time, like 1 year, 3 years, 5 years. But this idea that you can buy something that costs the sum of money that a home costs, spread it out over time, lock that cost in, and then remember, over time, assuming a long enough hold time, the likelihood is that the value of your home is going to go up. It's going to appreciate. Okay. And this is very low risk. All right. So again, having a long enough hold time, I just generally say it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 5 years. Could be a little bit shorter than that, could be a little bit longer than that, depending on what your circumstances are. But the idea isn't that you should go out and buy a house today, thinking that you're going to flip it next year and just automatically make money because real estate only goes up. It doesn't only go up. In the short term, it can go up and down. It can fluctuate the same way that a stock does or the value of another investment. But over time, for a multitude of reasons, it tends to go up. So with a long enough hold time, it's very safe. And when you consider that in the context that, you have to live somewhere, right? So there's food, there's clothing, and there's shelter, one of the basic necessities. Got to have a roof over your head. So if you don't own it, you're going to rent it. And if you don't rent it, then you own it. There's no way of escaping that cost. And so when you look at it in that context, it makes it not only a safe investment, but it also makes it very profitable. Okay. So now think about this. I think of the 30-year fixed rate mortgage like a bicycle for real estate. Okay. Think efficiency. All right. Family home, the home that you're going to live in, you're not buying it. It doesn't kick off income to you, right? It's not that you have a tenant in there and they're going to pay you, or it's an investment where you buy it and it pays an income the way that other investments might. It has a large price tag because think about it, it has a large cost to build. Okay. It's expensive. And it's unrealistic. It's expensive to the point that it's unrealistic to think that you're going to save up enough money to buy a house like that. For a lot of reasons, it's not feasible. Okay. So ordinary, everyday people would not be able to afford to own their own home. But that's not the case. We have this thing called 30-year fixed rate mortgage. So think about think about a world where you didn't have a 30-year mortgage. You'd be forced to rent. Okay. Why? Because if you can't own, you have to rent. Remember, so that premise. But renting does the same thing that a mortgage does for the price of that shelter, which is the basic necessity. It chops it up into little pieces and it spreads it out over time. So when I think of this, and sometimes people take offense with the buy versus rent analysis that I do, the fact that I say you have to live somewhere. And when you do that analysis in that context, you can take out the cash flowing for the mortgage, right? Because when you're comparing it to renting, if you own, you don't rent, and if you rent, you don't own. So in one, you have you're counting a rent payment, but you're not counting a mortgage payment. And the other one, you're counting a mortgage payment and not counting a rent payment. So they cancel each other out when you're looking at it from the other perspective. You can't escape that cost. All right. So what it does is it makes the calculation a little simpler, and you can isolate the appreciation and compare it to the cost of ownership beyond the cost of financing. Okay, because that gets wiped out by the rent that you're not paying. So without ownership, you'd be forced to rent. That's the way to chop it up over. That would be the only way to chop it up over time. But a fixed rate mortgage allows someone to own, not have the cash, still own by spreading that cost out over time. And it does this at what would be considered in the investment world as tremendous leverage. Okay. So if you're an investor and you're investing in stocks and securities and things like that, if you told them that you were 95% leveraged, that would be like, whoa, dude, you're like really aggressive. You're really aggressive. But that's the level of leverage that you have when you put 5% down and you buy a home. All right. Now, that doesn't mean that it's not okay to do that. Okay. I still think that for most people that are in the situation where they can benefit from owning a home, that affords them an opportunity that they should jump on. All right. Assuming that they're going to have a long enough hold time, and assuming that what they're agreeing to is affordable to them, not buying beyond their means. Because the risk is that you can't make the payments. Because with a long enough hold time, the property values are stable. And this is all made possible by a mortgage. All right. And a 30-year fixed rate mortgage is more efficient than other versions of the mortgage because the payments are lower. All right. Doesn't necessarily mean it's the best way to go, but really the idea here is that you're evaluating financing versus not financing, paying cash versus taking out a loan to do that. And the loan creates efficiency there. And in fact, it actually creates the market, because if there weren't enough people in the market to buy enough of the homes, there wouldn't be the demand there that there is. And it's the demand that creates the liquidity in that market that supports the price, and the price increases. So you still have this continual demand for homes, which is sort of like the foundational tenet of that market. So the idea of financing, it produces leverage. It makes the home a better investment. And leverage also plays into that calculation also. Because when you are evaluating the return on investment, you don't evaluate it on what the total cost or price of it is, because that's not what you paid. What you paid was the portion of the equity or the down payment that you put in to acquire control of the property. Okay. It doesn't matter that you only put 5% down. That's what you're out of pocket. And then, like in today's market, and for the near term future, the experts are predicting that we'll have 5-6% appreciation over the next several years. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. I don't have a crystal ball. If I did, I'd be doing something else besides this. And so would anybody else. So we always we got to be careful with what we say about those things. But the mortgage, it makes the home a better investment. So you can acquire it. You don't have to use all of your money. And for the money that you are putting out, you can get a tremendous return on it. I think before, when I've done shows where we actually went through this calculation as best I could on the radio, because it's, I can't show you anything. And even if you're watching us on the radio, I don't have a whiteboard. Like, we're not doing that version, like a webinar version. It's just, so you can see the show. It's not easy to follow, but it's easy to show it in the neighborhood of 20%, right? And that's a strong return. Mm-hmm. That would rival many things. I think actually in the Facebook group, there was a post or comment on somebody else's post that I did, investing in real estate, second only to the 401k match in your retirement plan. The free money portion, if you put in like 3%, maybe your employer puts in 3%. That 3% he puts in, free money, it's 100% return, right? That's really tough to beat. But outside of that, home does pretty good, all right? When you make payments on the mortgage, so you have the mortgage, it enables you to own it. You get appreciation over time, all right? You also get appreciation when you make those mortgage payments. So when you're comparing them to rent payments, when you make rent payments, you're not building any equity. When you're making the mortgage payment, even if the market doesn't go up, you're still building equity because a portion of each payment goes to pay down the loan. So you're in a healthy market, you're building equity two ways. And that's one of the things too that contributes to that 20+% ROI that I mentioned. But the end result, if you take all of that and you put it all together, you can make a strong case for the mortgage, the 30-year mortgage, being responsible at least in part for the democratization of home ownership. Now, what the heck does that mean? Okay. Once upon a time, before there were mortgages, freely mortgages, the way that we have them today. Mortgages have gone through a lot of reform since the Great Depression, okay? But once upon a time, it used to be only banks would give mortgages. You had to be very qualified, like really, really, really qualified, beyond just walking on water, okay? You had to have a big down payment. The rates were variable. And probably the worst facet of it all, because we could see those other terms are just features. They're just numbers, and we can work the numbers out. But there is a problem with them that whenever the bank wanted to, they could call it due, and that's what happened. That's part of what drove the Great Depression, the banking issues and all that were going on at that time, where the banks got in trouble. They needed cash. So where did they go? They went to the people who owed them money, which were people who had mortgage holders, like, look, we need our money back. And there was no, like today we have clauses in mortgages that, like, well, once a loan is made, the lender can't call it due. They have to stick to that payment schedule, as the only way it gets called due is if you don't make payments. Right, so you get foreclosed on, then that accelerates the payment cycle. But outside of that, the bank just can't decide like, oh, we need our money, we want our money back, we need our money back today, right? So recently, a couple weeks ago, with the Silicon Valley Bank thing, like that type of situation there, where banks fail because they run out, they become illiquid, and whatever investments they have aren't working the way they're supposed to. So they need cash. That's why when one of these things happen and people start scrambling around, and when they talk about 20 other banks got together and all threw money in a hat to prop this bank up, that's what they mean, is cash buys your way out of that. So they had things that were coming due, debts they owed, margin calls on things because of the way that they're managing their investment portportfolio, and they had something come due that they couldn't pay.
Or mismanaging.
Well, right. And that, right. So that's baked into that whole, that, that whole piece there. But today, they can't just go out and call a loan due. They'd have to do something else. All right. So,
by the way, I was surprised to find out last week from about 3 or 4 financial experts that there are actually almost 500 banks that close up every year. I did not realize that there were that many, because most of us were thinking, oh, it's just SVB and Financial and a couple others that are going through this at this current time. And actually, the average is about 500 a year. Obviously, a lot of small and medium market banks that go through this, but it didn't dawn on me that it was that many going through something as difficult as a reorganization kind of thing, a bankruptcy where other banks take over. And we've seen that here in the St. Louis area where well-known banks have all of a sudden disappeared, and you wonder, whoa, where did this other bank come from? And then you realize, oh, they're coming into this market from another city because they bought out whatever assets were left in such and such a bank.
Yeah. And it has to do with the types of investments they make. So whenever you have, you've heard of diversification before. So the idea is that you're supposed to diversify so that if the market goes south or there's issues in one area, you're okay because you have another area that isn't affected by it. Or better yet, another area, if this one goes down, then this one goes up to actually compensate for it. And they're supposed to be managed so that when you look at the thing as a whole, that it's okay, right? Which that's why all the banks don't fail when the market gets really rough, okay? But sometimes things slip through the cracks. I don't know how it happens. Okay, I can imagine how it happens, but
because you look at Silicon Valley Bank and wonder why the FDIC or other financial parts of the government didn't look at them and realize these guys are going to be insolvent here if they keep going the way that they're going. So I think a lot of us were caught off guard when that happened.
Well, I mean, you prepare financial statements and, most of the time, how many if 500 fail every year, how many banks are there? And how many banks are there? There's tons of thousands of banks. There's banks that that you can walk into, and then there's other things that, by definition, technically are banks that you have never heard of. They've been created for a particular reason, like Silicon Valley Bank. I mean, it was a mainstream bank, but they were...
they kind of focused on startups, correct?
They did banking for startups out in the Silicon Valley area. And they were friendly to those types of companies and and networked in that. And I don't know enough about it to know the ins and outs of exactly what happened. Like specifically, they did this and so that happened. I just know that generally what happened, I know what causes that. And that's confirmed by the reaction that took place. So, they failed. Signature, they both got propped up, bought out. They needed money. There's a handful of other banks, some of them like I think it's First Republic or something like that.
Yes, First Republic. And then overseas you have Credit Suisse.
Yeah, companies
going through issues.
Right, that's like a whole nother, that was more of a Lehman moment. Okay. Still serious. If you think about it, that's like one of the backbones of that. Them and UBS, they had a hold on the market over there. Now UBS got handed that. They're celebrating. They're celebrating right now.
It's like the nationalization of the banks in Switzerland.
Yeah.
From the perspective that I've seen over the last week or so.
Yeah. So, there is a lot going on. There's a lot that goes into this. There's a lot of Murphy's Law, the law of unintended consequences, that when one thing happens, other things that weren't anticipated to happen. If Steve Jobs was still around and we could ask him, say go back 50-ish years now, and, when you were thinking of the statement, the computer is a bicycle for the mind, did you connect all the dots? And now let's bring it into 2023. We got this thing called ChatGPT, right? That's a bicycle for the mind. It's a computer. Now it's a rendition it's far beyond the rendition of the computer that Jobs invented or brought to the masses. He invented that democratization that brought the price of computers down, brought them to masses, made them usable by everybody to create that mass movement. But without that, we wouldn't have ChatGPT. We wouldn't have that. We wouldn't have that today. So, and there are multiple tipping point moments that occur along the way that make all of that possible.
Plus the tangential aspect of AI, of artificial intelligence, and that the computer aspect of AI along with ChatGPT. So, boy, that's a lot of stuff. when you consider all of that's happened in the last 50 some years.
Yeah. Well, ChatGPT that OpenAI was founded in 2015. So that hasn't been around all that long at all. So,
but to think where we've come from 1973 in the article that you were talking about from Scientific American, back when I was in college, then, sad to say I didn't have a subscription to Scientific American.
I was just learning to walk upright at that point. So,
but boy, to think where we've progressed since then.
Yeah. And, when you connect all the dots, so this is sort of like a glimpse into the way that I think and the way that I look at things. And I'll listen to a Jobs and I'll try to draw parallels and I'll try to understand the way he understands things because he's a smart guy. He's a successful guy. He did a lot of great things, If we could just do one of those things, I'd be, happy.
Yeah.
But he tells that story and I hear that and, it just starts to connect dots on sort of half understanding things that are like half thought through that now all of a sudden instantly got completed by this one idea. And one of those is just the fact that the mortgage, it breaks the cost down. It puts it within reach of the masses. Because the masses have reach, it creates a market, creates demand for that market. The demand for that market creates the stability, which is what drives the price up, which is what makes it a good investment, which makes more people want it. And it creates this, what's called a network effect, where as something occurs, it goes to feed itself. By the way, that's the way AI works. And that's the reason why these discoveries and these things are starting to come out faster now, because they're being driven more and more by computers, which work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They don't get paid overtime. And, they don't make mistakes. They do exactly what you tell them to do. So once you figure out, so the magic was, what do we tell it in order to get it to do what we want to do? By the way, neural networks were created back in the 60s, or maybe even the 50s. I forget. I watched a thing on it. The idea of the neural network is old. It was an idea. It was basically science fiction at the time because the technology didn't exist in order to implement it. And the guy that invented it, the guy that thought it up, he tried to set it up in a very rudimentary form. Like today, if there's 1,000 layers to it, we only had the technology to implement layer one. Mm-hmm. And it didn't have enough. It didn't have enough horsepower to do work the way that when you mash up 1,000 of those layers together and the way that the network learns and then feeds itself and does all that. It's network effect as well.
And now we've come to the point where I think folks are wondering, how soon will robots take over? Will AI systems take over? Because we can't keep up with it. Like you said, it's an exponential improvement. It just keeps getting stronger and stronger.
Who's to say they haven't already?
Well, that's true.
I'm just kidding. I'm not a robot. No. Yeah, I could talk for days literally on this. I have intense interest in this subject, but I will spare you and everybody else on that. But the democratization of home ownership, it's a big deal. And basically that is what creates the wealth for the middle class. So we're going to jump into that idea when we come back from break, and we'll see what that's all about.
We'll discuss it some more. You're listening to Homewise Radio. I'm Stal Ponticus. That's Michael Miget, the host and creator of the show, and we will return in a moment. Welcome back to Homewise Radio. I'm Stal Ponticus, along with the host and creator of the show, Michael Miget, and we are glad that you're along with us this morning. And Michael, let's get back into the discussion.
Are you still sure about that? Yeah, we've really covered some ground today. So started talking about one of my favorite technology figures, Steve Jobs, and a quote that he lived by and believed, which was, "A computer is a bicycle for the mind." Where that came from, the Scientific American article. Jumping over to Warren Buffett and his miracle of the 30-year mortgage, and how a 30-year mortgage brings the idea and the possibility of owning your own home, the idea of home ownership, to the masses by making it, basically taking that big, large, gigantic chunk of money that it takes to buy a house for the ordinary, average, everyday person, and bringing it within reach for them, so that you don't need all of the money up front to buy that house. You can break it up into payments over time. Okay, that's what a mortgage does, and it's really a great thing. Before we had those, we did not have widespread ownership of the masses, or of real estate by the masses, the homes that they lived in. Okay, and real estate is special. It's a good store of wealth. It grows over time, having to do with the stability of demand and prices for homes. Because think about it. We have, when I make the statement that there's always going to be demand for houses, right? That's a pretty strong statement. Does that ring any bells or affect you in any way?
I guess probably over the years, as you contemplate whether you actually want to make a purchase and you want to move and you want to see where the market is at, yes, I would say, yeah, it's something that you do want to consider, yes.
Yeah, there's always going to be demand for it. So like you've heard the saying, they're not making any more real estate, right? There's only so much ground to go around. Now, we're not anywhere near running out of ground. Like, there's a lot of dead space in between cities. Now, within a city, yeah, but overall, there's still ground available. But part of this job, one of the things that I've learned to look at is something called household formations, okay? Birth rates, death rates, marriage rates, and divorce rates, and things like that talk about those things all mashed together, determine how many first-time home buyers there are going to be in any year. But generally, when you have more people coming into the market than are dying to leave the market, you have an increase in overall demand, right? So you need new housing. And when you stack that on top of the fact that people like to move around, so we're very, the home that we live in, it says a lot about us, economically, socially, emotionally, and things like that. So people tend to move around as they move up the economic chain, as they move up the social chain, or down. I mean, they go up and down.
A lot of intangibles.
There's a ton of layers to it. So to say it's any one thing greatly oversimplifies it, other than objectively looking at it and just kind of making these broad stroke statements that people want houses, they want to live in houses, better to own than to rent. If you have long enough hold time, those kinds of blanket statements. Okay.
And job situations too.
Yeah. There's always going to be demand because there's always going to be more humans, right?
And you wind up with urban sprawl.
That too. So you stack all this up, and there's always going to be that escalating demand. Mm-hmm. And so that's good. That's good for housing. It supports the idea that we want to own it. And so when you get these things all working together, it starts to feed itself, and that's what goes on to perpetuate this. And that's a good thing. What it's done, so that's the democratization of homeownership, the bringing of that expensive thing down into within the reach of the masses, so that anybody that wants it, for the most part, can have a shot at it. Okay, it creates middle class wealth, and when you create middle class wealth, that's the spreading effect that people tend to like and favor. Right? They don't want too much wealth concentrated in too few of places, because it gives too few people too much power. And we're just speaking economically right now, not politically. But a healthy economy has a healthy middle class because it's the bulk of the people. And so when you can put wealth into their hands, and so there's all the reasons why, and then we did there was a separate show on what, why that is. Why does real estate, especially primary residence, owner occupied, like the family home, the home that you live in, why that is such a good store of value and why it's a good investment and all those things. But if you think about it, so one of the headline tenets of this show is the family home, the epicenter of your personal financial picture. It's the epicenter of your personal wealth. It's where most of your wealth is going to wind up or be represented by home equity at moving up to and at retirement. My premise is that moving forward into the future, the family home is going to play a bigger and bigger active role in actively funding a retirement plan. Why? Because it's going to be forced to. Because as prices go up and it's taking up more and more of your resources along the way to purchase it, and the cost of things continue to go up, and we're living longer and longer and longer, more and more people are going to need more and more of the money that they've accumulated over their lifetimes to make it through that retirement. And so far, there's kind of been a luxury. Like once upon a time, there was a luxury, like you didn't need a 2-earner family to get by. Like it was, the man or the woman, I guess, could go to work. The other one could stay home and take care of the kids. And then we hit a certain point where, the solution to the economic problem was, whoever's not working can go to work. And so now you have a 2-income family. Now, okay, that's solved, and that kicked the can down the road further. And this just been doing, we're at the tail end of now, it looks like anyway, what a 40-year reduction in interest rates, bond market. This started in the early 80s. Now moving, maybe we're into the 50-year super cycle of bonds. Well, part of what's been financing that life is this cheaper and cheaper and cheaper money. And eventually you get to a point where you get to zero. I know we didn't exactly get to zero, but you can't really get to zero because in lending, there's always some risk, and that carries a premium with it. So you can't have a zero.
It was pretty close though.
Yeah, that would fundamentally crash the market. But if you look at rates in terms of inflation, if the inflation rate is higher than the interest rate that you have on a debt, then you in effect have a negative interest rate on the debt, because it's a fixed rate debt, I should say, because that payment is fixed. So as time goes on, the dollars become less and less valuable, but it takes the same number of those less and less dollars to pay the debt. The net present value of that debt is less as time goes on. Okay. Which is another beauty of the 30-year fixed rate mortgage, is you can push off 30 years paying for something that you can get today, get the appreciation for it, lock that price in, and let inflation just chew away at that cost. And so I'll tell people that when looked at in that sense, the effective rate on the borrowing of the mortgage for the house is effectively zero. What it's costing you over time when you look at it through that lens. So if you take your financial picture as a whole, now it doesn't mean that you're not making a payment. It doesn't mean that the interest rate goes to zero, but you have to look at the way money is affected by the other things that are going on. And it's not a bad thing, but it's just this, they don't teach this in school, right? Most people don't understand it. It's complicated, all right? I wouldn't expect you to understand it. Would consider myself a fairly smart guy, but before it was shown to me and explained to me and I learned it, which by the way, I was a mortgage lender for a pretty long time before I was taught this fact. So I was getting to the right answers through other avenues, but it was my financial, a period of time there when I started to dig deep into true financial planning concepts, like as a general, that body of knowledge as a whole. And one of the things to talk about are taxes and inflation and looking at the way that really affects. That put a whole new meaning and understanding to things that I had been doing intuitively over many years. What I thought was, hey, this is a really good result. When looked at through that other lens, well, this is off the charts. Clearly, and it just, but that's not the way that people generally look at things. So when I'm looking at situations, when I'm doing the analysis, I'm trying to take into consideration some of those concepts that aren't widely known or understood, but do have an effect. And not that I have to explain it to you or teach it to you or anything like that, but I can incorporate that in and use it as, as a way to look at this in addition to all the other ways that we would have to look at something. And so you can get the benefit of that without even knowing it. So, I tell people I'm bad at promoting myself because I don't hey, you should tell people that they're not interested in that. They just want to know, what's the payment? Can I afford it? What's the rate? And because they equate rate with payment. And, it's kind of a stretch to get into the idea of strategy, right?
Because you feel like you're getting into the weeds and that maybe.
Yeah, because I don't really need to I don't need to understand that. But I want you to understand it.
Yes.
Because
it affects.
Not just because I want to teach it to you. Believe me, there's no money in teaching it to you. The reason why I think you should know it is because the more that you know about it, the better you're going to be able to succeed from that strategy moving forward. I can't tell you how many times I put a thing together and put somebody into it, and they wandered off into somebody else's bear trap, I call them, and they end up doing something with somebody else, or maybe they sell and they buy and they go with the realist person, they don't call me back. And that next person just completely undoes what I put together and the ground that they covered. I'm like what's going on?
Dude, what are you doing?
Yeah. But so the more that you know and understand about it, the better you're going to do with the idea moving forward.
Mm-hmm.
But this idea of, tying, giving context to the idea, the mortgage makes the buying of the family home in real estate, it makes it an efficient transaction. Okay. Efficiency is one of the tenets of my home lending and home buying system. When I talk about financing efficiently, we haven't actually gotten into that, the technical deep weeds on all that, although everything that I talk about is built on top of that foundational concept. There's basically 3 foundational concepts. I just haven't named them for you on the air yet. But one of them, so today is the first one I'm going to dig out. It's actually step number 2. It's efficiency. We're financing efficiently the bicycle for real estate, right? Makes it work for people. And that coupled with the idea of bringing it to the masses, and that creates that market and creates that mass movement and that network effect. When you put all that together, it makes real estate something that everybody's going to want to own. It's like the foundation of your wealth. It's the foundation of where your family lives. It's the foundation of what you identify with. If you, when you come home, just even the phraseology that we use to describe, we came home from vacation, we came home from work, we were always going someplace. Where's your stuff? Oh, it's at home. Well, who's that? Oh, he's at home. It's like this, it's this place. What would we do? What if you didn't have a home? What if, and not, I don't mean homeless, but I just mean, I can think back to when I rented apartments, and one of the ideas of renting an apartment was that I could move every year because I kind of liked new places all the time, and I didn't know what I didn't know at the time. So that I could not imagine that today, that not just the fact that I got a lot of stuff to move, like boxes and papers and work and stuff like that, but changing the address, all the pain, but just the mental idea that there's a home base, and it's and so much is defined from that. So that idea I've taken, that's the built-in piece for the home ownership. What I contribute to the equation is to make it financially not only feasible, because some of that's built into the system. Any 30-year mortgage does that, because any 30-year mortgage is better than no 30-year mortgage, assuming that you have long enough hold time, assuming you can pay it, assuming it's affordable, and things like that. All right. I can make that better by making it more efficient, and we're twisting those dials. It doesn't change. Generally, it doesn't change the idea, should I buy, shouldn't I buy? Just think of it as I can buy better. I can get a little more for my money.
Because you're looking ahead and trying to evaluate where you are now so that you can move ahead to whatever the next step is.
Dials we can twist, levers we can flip within the box of that 30-year mortgage, the way that we structure it. So the buying of a home, it's a fairly complicated transaction. There's a lot of moving parts there. How much are you putting down? What are your closing costs? Well, there's no one rate on any day. We talked about that. You can have any rate you want. It's just a matter of what are you willing to pay for it. So this year, the same rate last year, well, you can't get it anymore because you'd have to pay so much up front that it's not feasible from an investment standpoint. So the product's not offered. But you could pay a whole bunch of points and get a much, much, much lower rate than what you have today. But that, some people would be better off doing that. Other people would be better off doing that, but can't do that. Okay, so if you can't do that, that's okay. You've still taken the big step, which was, we're going to break the price up, make payments we can afford. We're going to get on the horse and start to ride it.
Exactly.
Right?
Yep.
We'll learn how to get a better saddle, and we'll learn how to ride it a little better as we go along. And as conditions change, we'll ramp and we'll adjust, and we will course correct. And then at some point, we're going to switch horses. And each time we switch horses, we're going to take what we learned from the previous one, and we're going to apply it to the new one, so that the new one, we don't start off in the same place we did the old one. So the idea that, hey, Mike, I don't need to worry about building equity and making payments and all that stuff because I'm not going to be in this house 30 years. Who cares what it's going to cost? Well, you got to look at it over time frames and figure out. That's how you figure out this way or that way, option A, option B.
Yes.
Do I do this or not? That's how we look at it. That's how we do the analysis. So anyway, that's the point, is really get an analysis, just have an open enough mind to know that there are ways to get things more efficient, make them better options. And that's what I spend most of my day doing, aside from making radio shows.
So if folks want to get in touch with you, how would they do that?
Well, you can find me here at homewiseradio.com, as always. Also on my mortgage website, goshelter.com. And you can call or text 314-275-0314.
Give the website info again, one more time.
Homewise.radio.com.
Okay.
It's the radio show website. And then my mortgage company website, Shelter, SHELTER.com.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Great learning experience today. So thank you, Michael. And thank you for joining us for Homewise Radio with Michael Miget, the host and creator of the show. My name is Stal Ponticus, and we hope that you will join us again next Sunday morning. Thanks for being with us.
Take care.
Loans and loan information provided by Shelter Mortgage, Inc. Visit us at GoShelter.com and MLS number 192609. A Missouri residential mortgage licensee and equal housing lender. Call 888-497-2558 for additional cost information. Other restrictions may apply.